this is, and I'm going to show you just a series of generalized graphs here that as a scientist, they always give me a little bit of pause, just these sort of generalized perfect graphs, but it's not really one study, but a general trend seen reliably across many studies. And that is, first of all, if you were to just look at performance in, for example, shooting baskets or shooting a target with a gun, your level of arousal will also form this sort of, inverted U curve, where there's sort of a peak level of arousal where you will see sort of a maximum effect on your performance, whether it's shooting basketball or shooting a target. If you go over that point, your performance declines. And if you basically are not even there, you haven't woken up yet, if you will, you're not up close to performing at the optimal level of arousal. So, or the uh, ultimate level of performance. So, in addition to just subjective reports of arousal, you can see the same trend if you plot blood levels of epinephrine across the x axis, which suggests that epinephrine itself enhances memory, but this effect is both dose and time dependent. The time I'll show you another graph on here in a minute, but it is most effective if the epinephrine increases immediately after the performance that you are being evaluated in. And in general, epinephrine or adrenaline, as it's often called as well, increases in response to stressful events. Here you can see the timing graph. This shows that it's best to see epinephrine increase immediately after a training event if you want to see an increase in performance. One question is whether or not this explains what's known as flashbulb memories. Flashbulb memories are those that are thought to involve amygdala circuitry in sort of stamping in a stronger memory and occur after, very emotional events that are very personal to the individual. These are vivid, long lasting memories. And again, they have to occur around a shocking event that's very personal to the subject. Basically, it seems as if the mind has taken a picture of the circumstances in which the news was learned. For me, I remember when the 9/11 attacks occurred. I am not really a follower of British royalty, so I really have no idea where I was during Princess Diana's death. But that certainly was meaningful to a lot of people. First, does anybody have a flashbulb memory that really resonates with them? I thought about COVID, but that was sort of like it sort of trickled in. Yeah, 9/11 definitely. 9/11 was a big one. The death of my father was a big one. I remember I was actually at a scientific meeting and I was about to go in actually to hear the Dalai Lama speak. And I remember exactly where I was. I remember the way that the hallway looked. I remember the kind of coffee I had in my hand. I remember what the cup looked like. I don't know. But yeah, 9/11 is also a very vivid memory for me. Uh, you know, but these are thought to be different from normal memories. One point is that they last a lifetime, and another is that they do not decay or change over time. So, basically, I already asked this. What were you doing when you heard of the following, like the, attack on the World Trade Center? To some people, it's Michael Jackson's death. Others was the Boston Marathon bombing. My wife is from Boston, so that one specifically, I think, really struck a nerve with her. Yeah, the 1989 earthquake. Ooh, yeah, right up. Yeah, that was a big one, especially for certain people. And then for others, it's a personal event like the death of a loved one. So, what causes flashbulb memories? Now, there's, first of all, even some debate as to whether or not flashbulb memories are that different than normal memories. So, let me go over some of the controversy there. First, there's a study by Cahill and McGaugh, which argues or suggests that flashbulb memories occur because of the release of epinephrine during times of high emotion. The idea is that epinephrine makes memories more vivid, enhancing recall. And this would likely have an evolutionary basis, that this would have been selected for to promote survival, with the idea being that the vivid recall of emotional event may help the animal or human cope with or prevent a similar situation in the future. Now, there are some conflicting things out there. First, there was a study by McCloskey who interviewed people shortly after the Challenger disaster, and again after 9 months. Many of the participants forgot elements of the event, and there were errors in the recall. This also suggested that flashbulb memories are no different from normal memories. However, as any of you might attest to in regard to sort of the state of where we are with the space program right now, we tend to be a little, unattached from the space program since the moon landing and the space race with the Soviets. It may be that study didn't really find a clear effect because the Challenger explosion wasn't really something that elicited a flashbulb like a memory for us. So there's this other study by Conway et al. That studied people's memories involving the resignation of Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher was a Tory leader in the UK. Essentially, it would be just like the president suddenly resigning. There were, she had low popularity. It was statistically pretty similar to Trump at the time of her resignation. So, I mean, not like not zero. It was more around 40%. She had enacted some controversial things like, she imposed a tax to vote, which was not very popular outside of the Tory class or the sort of the working class. Labor, I guess is what they call it. The Labor Party didn't love that idea. And she also had a nice run. Her husband even, was trying to nudge her to resign, and but she it still came as quite the shock. I mean, think of just the president resigning out of the blue. I mean, this is someone that's really, supposed to take a lot of criticism and be able to deal with it. And I'll also point out that Margaret Thatcher was a scientist. She was a woman in STEM, actually, before she was prime minister. She was a research chemist. Fun fact. But anyway, the idea here was that the Challenger explosion did not have personal significance to the participants. So this other group studied the people's memories immediately after the resignation of Margaret Thatcher, and then again 11 months later. And in the UK, where this would have had, a very strong, resignating effect throughout society, the majority of people still had these very clear flashbulb memories where people outside of the UK did not, suggesting that flashbulb memories do exist and are different from normal memories. However, they may only exist for events with very personal significance, which really in hindsight makes an awful lot of sense. So how accurate are the flashbulb memories? In this study by Sheingold and Terry, participants were found to have very good memories for highly personal events, which remain consistent over time. And this also shows that flashbulb memories have to have an emotional importance to the individual. That study also demonstrated that it can occur with positive memories as well, not just shocking negative ones. But I do want to go back here and just touch on the overall strengths and weaknesses of the general overall picture of research on the subject. There are several strengths. First, it's very naturalistic. Flashbulb memories, reactions and memories are formed from real life events that are highly important to us as humans, and therefore are thought to have high ecological validity. However, The research has not always been reliably replicated from lab to lab or study to study. I mean, for example, the Challenger study, it's easy, I guess we can ignore it if we want, but, it's still a negative finding. There could be an explanation for that, but, we can explain ourselves out of a lot of situations. That doesn't necessarily mean that it was a perfectly reliable phenomenon. And a lot of the research is retrospective. We cannot reliably measure how accurate people's initial memories are. And we also can't manipulate the variables at play. I mean, were you looking at a society that had a large amount of alcoholism, for example? Could, going through withdrawal impact the results in one society versus the other? Did the event occur on a Saturday? Did it occur on a work day? These sorts of things are all very important and cannot be controlled for. But let's get back to the hormones and neurobiology here. And there might actually be a bit of a disconnect, which is where I'm getting at. Epinephrine could be involved in facilitating, encoding, storing, or retrieving information involving the flashbulb memory. However, epinephrine is a lipid that would be a polar molecule, meaning that it does not cross the blood-brain barrier readily. So how can epinephrine secreted by the adrenals affect learning and memory, which is encoded by the brain? There are two working hypotheses that I think if you put enough thought into this, you can see that the two are probably very linked, and it could be the two in association and sort of an all of above situation. But first, here, just look at this graph. What does this look identical to the graph that I just showed you with epinephrine, and also identical to ones that you might have seen in another class with arousal, subjective reports of arousal across the x-axis? They all basically overlap one another in a parallel sinusoidal fashion. So what does this possibly mean? One is that epinephrine secretion in a stressed animal can lead to an increase in blood glucose levels, which it does. Glucose enhances memory for avoidance learning. Avoidance is something I study in my own lab. Basically, an interesting true story. It was actually first demonstrated avoidance behavior in people by John Watson, the infamous psychologist that went into advertising after, he was sort of caught having an affair with one of his students. But anyway, Watson, the so-called father of behaviorism, tried to replicate Pavlov. If I wanted to take up more time here, I'd show you videos I have of visiting Pavlov's lab. Maybe we'll have time another time. But it's a very interesting situation they have there. But regardless, Watson actually tried to replicate Pavlov and failed to do so in humans. It turns out that we don't have huge salivary glands like dogs. So he actually used one of Pavlov's rivals by the name of Beshterev, who was studying conditioned responses in dogs using electric shock, and demonstrated that in men, women, and children, they could show an avoidance response to electric shock. Yet again, another somewhat controversial study by Watson, but it was still pretty important. A few issues are, one, that probably most importantly, he labeled it a reflex rather than a conditioned response. It obviously is not a reflex, it's a conditioned response, avoidance behavior, but avoiding something bad from happening, like getting shocked by electricity. One little fun other side point there is that Beshterev, Pavlov's rival, was not on such good terms with the Russian government, and he, was disappeared. True story. But anyway, the evidence that glucose might be playing a role here in sort of stamping in that flashbulb or emotional memory, comes from the following observations. The memory enhancing effects of epinephrine can be blocked by treating animals with drugs that block peripheral epinephrine receptors, but these blockers have no effect on memory enhancement produced by glucose treatment. In addition, the agents most effective enhancing memory in humans all share a common feature: elevated blood glucose levels. Also, just from some experience working, being around the military, I can tell you a few interesting things there. First, it's very trendy amongst the special forces that they follow a ketogenic diet. And, in addition to making you look shredded, the ketogenic diet, actually has positive effects on post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's possible that that is associated with the role, or basically taking glucose out of the picture. If there's no glucose on board, maybe it is harder to stamp in that emotional memory, which might explain why the ketogenic diet reduces occurrences of post-traumatic stress disorder. It might increase your chance of a heart attack, though, depending on how you follow it. Not really, advocating for it, just stating observations. But, how does glucose enhance memory? The idea is that more glucose would enter neurons. Remember that neurons need glucose or some form of energy to function at a high level. Ketones act a little differently, but the brain can utilize ketones as a fuel source. But most are tuned to use glucose, which stimulates an increase in the release of acetylcholine from neurons. Increases in acetylcholine in the basal forebrain are known to be cognitive enhancers. You might be interested to know that there actually are spin-off pharmaceutical companies from the cigarette industry. I remember that nicotine is one of the primary cholinergic receptors. And, it has long been thought that nicotine can stave off Alzheimer's disease. There is definitely a correlation between cigarette smoking and the lack of or reduced rates of dementia and Alzheimer's. There's also a pretty big confound in there in that you die before you get too old. However, the correlation persists nonetheless, as do several nicotine-based pharmaceutical companies studying cholinergic agonists to stave off dementia. You also see evidence of this in, especially in athletics. It's very common. Baseball traditionally, very strong tradition there of people using chewing tobacco with the idea that the dip or chewing tobacco will improve one's executive function and make it easier to hit the baseball, which does require some level of executive function. You see similar things in, military operation, trying to shoot a bullseye, and even some college students trying to do well on exams. One thing to note there is, I'm a little familiar with that literature, and the cognitive enhancing effects of nicotine you become tolerant to very, very quickly. So you're probably left with an addiction without many beneficial effects over repeated use. But regardless, it's also worth pointing out severe memory deficits in patients with Alzheimer's disease or AIDS, neuro-AIDS, are correlated with marked reduction in acetylcholine secreting neurons in the basal forebrain, particularly the nucleus of Meinhardt. In addition, injecting rats with epinephrine blockers 30 minutes before foot shock, which causes epinephrine to rise, leads to no glucose rise if beta blockers are also treated, but still rises if alpha blockers are. Beta blockers, are also commonly given for heart attacks. I have taken beta blockers before stressful events. It's actually not that uncommon that a lot of people do, in a variety of fields, in a variety of situations. It could be very stressful. They certainly can reduce like when you think of that sort of adrenaline rush, when you're getting, or the epinephrine rush before the stressful event or in the face of it. it does prevent some of the, deleterious side effects, and can also reduce the chances of a heart attack occurring. But memory enhancing effects of adrenergic agonists that cross the blood-brain barrier can also only be blocked with these beta blockers, which are blocking the beta adrenergic receptors. The amygdala is also thought to be involved here with the idea that peripheral epinephrine might act via the beta receptors to activate ascending neurons of the vagus. So the pathway is thought to involve the vagal, input to the nucleus of the solitary tract, which projects noradrenergic or norepinephrine fibers to the amygdala. Only the basolateral amygdala, seems to be very important here. The idea here is that the basolateral amygdala modulates the memory of the emotional experiences. If you lesion the various areas of the amygdala, only destruction of the BLA promotes the emotional memory or impairs the formation of it. And really, if you block any part of this pathway, it prevents memory enhancement through epinephrine. And that is one thing that I would really like to highlight here. Don't think of just the amygdala being the center of emotional memory. I would encourage you to think of it as a very important node in a complex circuit involved in emotional memory. That is more how the nervous system works. Here is some interesting evidence involving the beta blocker phenomenon. This is from a study that I copied from Nature. People read either an emotionally challenging story or a similar story that was emotionally neutral. I copied and pasted this slide from the box from the because I found 0.5 to be somewhat like crazy, but at the very least somewhat entertaining. So that basically difference in scenario is that the neutral person would be told, like, while walking along, a boy sees some wrecked cars in a junkyard, which he finds interesting. By contrast, another group would see, while crossing the road, the boy is caught in a terrible accident, which critically injures him. Like pretty different scenario there. But you see significantly impaired memory of emotional arousal, but not in the neutral story when you treat someone with beta blockers, supporting the idea that highly charged emotional memories require activation of the beta adrenergic receptors. Here is the actual graph within or neutral along the x-axis being those that were exposed to the neutral event, like the junkyard, whereas the active arousing memory would be the one involving the horrific car accident. And the beta blocker did have a reasonable effect at reducing that emotional rating, although it's not completely back to baseline, I might add. But I will also just, give a case study subjective report that I personally have found beta blockers to be very effective at reducing sort of the impact of emotionally arousing events. There's also some interesting phenomenon here involving the amygdala from neuroimaging studies. Here are results from one such study demonstrating that the association between recall memory and amygdala activation during learning is highest when subjects are exposed to emotionally intense pictures. This is also most pronounced in women, which I think is an interesting phenomenon. Right. But yeah, interesting sex-based phenomenon. Women do tend to have also greater self-reports of post-traumatic stress disorder. Glucocorticoids are also involved, as are our MR and GR distinctions, which we'll get back into here in a second. But glucocorticoids, are increased by acute stress. And this is thought to contribute to the lasting memories as well. Chronic stress or long-term treatment with glucocorticoids, however, can impair memories. So, if this goes on for too long, it can actually lead to cognitive impairment. There are some support from this from the rodent literature involving the radial arm maze. This is a experiment or design where various arms of a maze are baited, or food is placed in them, and you test the animal's ability to remember which arms have the food in it. Chronic stress impairs the spatial learning associated with the radial arm maze. However, if you do the same thing in what's known as the Morris water maze, which is basically a tank filled with water, you see less of an effect, which could have to do with just the stress of being plopped in the deep end. If you're a rat, which is essentially what's going on here, that the animals can't touch the bottom in a Morris water maze, and they basically have to continue swimming until they find a platform that they can rest on, which could be a little stressful, suggesting that this only is affecting performance to an extent. But if you really throw in if you're really in a more fraught situation, maybe there's sort of a ceiling of how much glucocorticoids can do. However, the natural glucocorticoids are thought to have a high affinity for the MRs, and the GRs are only activated when levels are high, like during a stressful event. Many synthetic drugs that act on these receptors have a high affinity for the GRs versus the mineralocorticoids. So the idea is that blocking GRs but not MRs impairs performance on the spatial water maze, suggesting that the enhancing effects of acute stress on corticosteroid treatment on memory can be blocked by blocking the GRs specifically, which could be involved in sort of like the overdrive response in the stressful scenario. I've already sort of alluded to the idea that lesioning the BLA can block the memory facilitating effects of glucocorticoids. It can also block the memory facilitating effects of glucose. But anyway, the infusion of GR blocking drugs as well, like infusing them directly into the BLA, impairs memory consolidation, whereas infusion of GR agonists into the BLA enhances memory consolidation. Here's an interesting graph involving dexamethasone. Remember, I've already talked about dexamethasone a little bit when I talked about, sort of atypical, models of depression and Cushing's disease. But the idea is that dexamethasone acts on GRs, and this can lead to enhanced retention or enhanced latencies of emotional memory. But this effect is blunted when you lesion the basolateral amygdala, but not the central amygdala, or at least not to the same extent. Again, here's sort of a made-up simulated graph of a many studies, but it also shows the importance of the basolateral versus the central amygdala. Here you can see the effects of treating animals, rats, with microinfusions of GR agonists into the basolateral amygdala, and seeing this enhances memory consolidation in a dose-dependent manner. So the idea here is that the BLA in particular is an important node in a complicated circuit. The BLA appears to integrate hormonal information that is signaled through the vagus nerve involving glucose, likely, and also of the effects of glucocorticoids acting directly in the BLA. But it would be integrating not only these two forms of information, but probably an even wider array, and integrating them and then passing along that to other nodes in the circuit, including the hippocampus, amongst other regions that might be involved in the overall neural network involved in emotional memory formation. And it also would vary depending on, whether it involved sort of an emotional spatial memory, or emotion linked with a place at a specific point in time. Another great example here is going to Vietnam and soldiers there. It was not that uncommon to see a lot of the Vietnam, people in the Vietnam War, or I guess it wasn't technically a war, police action. I guess it's all about semantics. But the Vietnam police action, during that, a lot of the soldiers started to use heroin because, well, war is hell. And, they, interestingly, when many of the soldiers returned to the United States, not all of them, some of them certainly remained addicted, but a surprising number of people that used heroin heavily in Vietnam, when they came back to the United States, had no problem kicking the heroin when they're in a different environmental context with a different level of stressful stimuli going on. Again, it's like this. I'm just trying to frame the whole overall network and the idea that there are multiple interacting concepts here. But, going back to glucocorticoids, many species are known to stash or cache food in order to survive during times when food is scarce, involving spatial memory. We have a very fat squirrel in our yard that scares off all the other squirrels and birds and anything else that's competing with it. My kids have lovingly named him Chunky Chip. But he scolds us when, for example, we stop him from eating the pumpkins and these sorts of things. But birds also. So in one study, it was found that birds maintained on an unpredicted or variable food supply displayed elevated corticosterone concentrations compared to birds provided with unlimited food, like Chunky Chip is in our yard. Suggesting that corticosterone could play an evolutionarily conserved role here that is sort of maladaptive in sort of our new artificially stressful scenarios, which are so common in our society. Glucocorticoids also cause restructuring of the hippocampus. Again, think of this as a big circuitry that is being molded. Plasticity. The hippocampus contains a very high density of gluco-GR receptors in the brain, or GRs, and mediates regulation of the HPA axis. Neurogenesis, as you may recall, really only occurs in the dentate gyrus of the hippocampus, in addition to the olfactory bulb. But neurogenesis is responsive to high glucocorticoid concentrations, and you basically see an inhibition of new progenitor cells. You also see a change in morphology and function. Following repeated stress, you see basically a weaker or poorer, or basically a change in the neural network within the hippocampus. Of note, you see less dendritic branching. The branching is thought to be essentially, think of like Philopodia on the spines of the dendrites that are sort of like sending out feelers and always sort of looking for new ways to grow with environmental enrichment. Well, here you get the exact opposite. So it sort of prevents growth into new experiences in positive environments. Estrogen is also thought to be important. Estradiol generally enhances spatial memory in both males and females. Estradiol seems to enhance memory when the task is difficult. However, in humans, spatial memory is impaired in the periovulatory portion of the menstrual cycle when estradiol is high, an apparent contradiction. In addition, it doesn't seem that birth control affects memory all that much. So the literature here is a little bit of a mess. And in general, the estrogen and cognitive aging literature is a bit of a mess. It's something that Sapolsky touches on a little bit. Maybe it'll come back up in our next discussion. But the thing is that there are a series of studies. There have been studies done showing that estrogen can enhance cognitive memory, and during menopause, you see cognitive decline that correlates with the loss of estradiol. However, attempts to assess the effects of hormone replacement therapy have been not very consistent. One of the issues is, there are, some studies show that, hormone replacement therapy in postmenopausal women has benefits. Some show it reduces the risk of dementia. Some show no effect. Some show increased risk of dementia. Some have even reported that it can give you a heart attack. Some have even reported that it reduces your risk of a heart attack. All things to keep in mind. One variable in there that I think is important based on my understanding of the literature is the amount of progesterone versus estrogen in the hormone replacement therapy. Progesterone in particular, I think might be associated with the heart attack, correlation. But in general, the literature is sort of a hot mess in regard to the effects of hormone replacement therapy in menopause. The overall sort of medical opinion right now is that estrogen treatment of postmenopausal women has been shown to enhance verbal memory and reduce neuronal loss associated with Alzheimer's disease. There seems to be sort of a short-term, temporally constrained benefit here, meaning that the Women's Health Initiative has concluded that they, support or promote the use of certain forms of hormone replacement therapy. There could be a little devil in the details about progesterone versus estrogen. And, they also seem to limit the recommendation of when it is administered. And it's also worth pointing out that there are several longitudinal non-human primate studies that are also, trying to control for many of the factors that could be confounding these big, like longitudinal human studies that have been very mixed.